Chicago, I feel it. Another version of me, I was in it.
Yesterday, Chicago-born Cardinal Robert Prevost was elected the 267th Pope. He is the first American pontiff in the Catholic Church's over 2,000-year history. And as of yesterday, he became officially known as Pope Leo XIV. If you log on to X right now, you will see people super excited that we have a registered Republican, pro-life, traditional marriage-supporting Pope. And you'll also have people deeply distraught claiming that this new Pope is an open borders, anti-Trump, SJW, globalist, total shill. The question is, who is correct and does it even matter? Who is Pope Leo XIV? We're going to answer that question, but also some deeper questions about how to view the papacy in the modern world, especially here in America where things are so politicized. First, I want to give you all some background on who this Pope is. I've done a lot of reading. Frankly, I hadn't heard of him before today. I think a lot of us, unless you're a Catholic Church insider, you probably hadn't before. There's a lot to update you all on. So Pope Leo XIV grew up in a devout Catholic family with a father who was a Navy veteran and a school superintendent, and his mother was a librarian and choir singer. He's fluent in Spanish, French, and Italian, and he discovered his calling for the priesthood early on, serving as an altar boy and attending local Catholic schools in Chicago. His brother revealed in an interview yesterday that Pope Leo frequently played priest as a little boy, and he would use his mother's ironing board as an altar. Very cute. I love to see that. When I was little, my brother would constantly play priest as well, and my mom made him these little vestments, and he had a little tiny pallet for Holy Communion and a chalice for the precious blood. He would pretend to be consecrating the bread and wine. Michael, did you play priest as a little boy too? I think I remember your mom mentioning that. Yes, you did. Yeah, so Michael played priest as a little. Michael did not become a priest. I'm glad that Michael married me, but a lot of little boys that are Catholic grew up doing that, and it's a really beautiful thing. So obviously, he grew up in a very Catholic family. The new Pope earned a mathematics degree from Villanova University before joining the Order of St. Augustine in 1977. And later, he became a missionary in Peru. He spent most of his vocation in Peru. In 2014, he was made bishop in Peru by Pope Francis, then a cardinal, and finally, he became head of the dicastery for bishops in Rome in 2023. So that means he played a role, thanks to this appointment from Pope Francis, in selecting bishops around the world. It's a very powerful position, and it's really important for you to remember that he had this position for later on in the show. It's going to be relevant. So now that you have a little background on his life, the question that everyone seems to want answered is, who is he really? I want to start with the good. Pope Leo is firm on several Catholic teachings that are under attack in the modern world. Pope Leo is adamantly against female ordination, homosexuality, the issue of abortion. He's very pro-life, from conception till natural death. He's also a registered Republican who voted in Republican primaries and U.S. general elections while he was living abroad in Peru. On the issue of life, Pope Leo previously said, "We cannot build a just society if we discard the weakest, whether the child in the womb or the elderly in their frailty, for they are both gifts from God." Beautiful quote, very Catholic. This is what the church believes. It's very bizarre when we see priests and bishops start to become wishy-washy on this issue. So that's good that he is very solid on some of the most basic church teachings that are under attack in the modern world. Leo has explicitly stated that the homosexual lifestyle and the alternative families comprised of same-sex partners and their adopted children are at odds with the gospel. That's a very strong take to have, obviously in line with church teaching, but again, controversial these days. We even have so-called conservatives who are marrying, in same-sex relationships. They're adopting children. They're buying children by renting wombs through surrogacy. So this is definitely something that needs to be confronted by traditionalists, and Pope Leo is on the moral side with this issue. He also opposed government plans to add teachings about gender in school, calling, quote, the promotion of gender ideology confusing since they create genders that don't exist. Again, very positive sign. There is, unfortunately, some wishy-washiness about LGBTQ identity politics and anything under the sun that you can think of. There's going to be priests and bishops who, for some reason, are not in line with church teachings. Pope Leo clearly is on these fundamental issues. My former colleague at the Federalist, John Daniel Davidson, he made a really interesting point that Pope Leo is frankly more conservative on abortion and gay marriage than Trump and MAGA more broadly. You guys can say, well, I'm MAGA and I'm pro-life, and that's probably true for individuals in this chat. But objectively, if you look at the party position, the official position of this administration, of the majority of MAGA Republicans, that's not the case. They are much more pro-choice. They are obviously subsidizing IVF for certain parents who struggle for infertility, brazenly against church teachings. And they are also, of course, very pro-gay marriage. So this is an interesting thing to consider as we say, oh, he's woke, he's an SJW, he's not a traditionalist. On certain issues, Pope Leo is already more conservative than President Trump and a lot of other MAGA Republicans, something to keep in mind. The official party position, far more liberal on sex and marriage than this new pope. Something else that's observational but still important is Pope Leo XIV appeared before the public yesterday wearing the traditional papal garb on the balcony, unlike Pope Francis. And a lot of people have taken this as a signal that he has an appreciation for tradition. And there are some unconfirmed users on X who are claiming that Pope Leo has said the traditional Latin Mass in the past. Now, you all know if you listen to this show that traditional Latin Mass has been under assault thanks to Pope Francis, who essentially permitted left-wing bishops to outlaw Latin Mass in their diocese. It happened to my old diocese in Chicago thanks to Cardinal Supich. So if Pope Francis is open to permitting the traditional Latin Mass, Pope Leo is open to permitting the traditional Latin Mass. This is a major win for traditional Catholics who have been marginalized not only by the FBI in this country, but by the previous pontiff. Now that I told you some of the positives, there are some causes for concerns. And I want to shout out Sean Fleetwood at The Federalist and John Henry Weston at LifeSite News. They did a lot of digging yesterday, and I'm about to share with you some of what they've come up with that make me take pause. So first thing I got to mention is Pope Leo persecuted Bishop Strickland, and he also appointed Cardinal McElroy. So who is Bishop Strickland? Bishop Strickland is the former bishop of the Diocese of Tyler, Texas. And in recent years, he accused Pope Francis of making changes or promoting ideas that Strickland believed contradicted core teachings and traditions of the Catholic Church. A lot of Catholics have felt this way. So Pope Francis, in retaliation, removed Bishop Strickland from his position in November 2023 after Strickland refused to resign. Now, remember, I said Pope Leo's job, as of very recently, was to help select new bishops. So he actually played a very instrumental role in removing Bishop Strickland from Tyler, Texas. This is viewed as a deep, gross betrayal, unfairly retaliatory by a lot of Catholics who argue that Strickland was simply standing up for what's right and simply a supporter of Latin Mass and traditional church teachings. Then things get really bad as we talk about Pope Leo's position selecting bishops. Pope Leo installed notorious Cardinal McElroy as Archbishop of Washington. Now, and this is despite Cardinal McElroy being implicated in the cover-up of a sexual abuse scandal concerning Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Now, Theodore McCarrick sexually abused numerous minors and adult seminarians for decades, and he was later stripped of his priesthood. McElroy was warned in a letter about McCarrick in 2016 and did nothing beyond bureaucratic paper filing in response. Also, McElroy voted against the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops' petition pressing the Vatican for more transparency and speed in the McCarrick investigation. Why would McElroy do either of those things? Why would he seemingly protect a child abuser? And then why would Pope Leo promote someone like McElroy? It's a serious question. Very concerning, deeply concerning. Something else that is concerning is Pope Leo forced the faithful to receive Holy Communion on the hand. He banned you receiving Holy Communion on the tongue, and he only heard confession by telephone during COVID. These are both invalid and arguably sacrilegious, so not okay. And during COVID, goes for all Christians, anybody of faith, we needed our religious leaders to stand up for the faithful, to not capitulate to the tyranny. What faith leader would inhibit worship and the sacraments, shut down church, all while the government let weed dispensaries and liquor stores, and in some cases strip clubs, stay open? And I get that Pope Leo was not in the U.S., he was obviously in Peru at this time, but either way, it's not an excuse to capitulate to the COVID tyranny the way that he did. Leo also reposted a call for the COVID-19 vaccines to be available for all, and he reposted a U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops post that called getting vaccinated, quote, an act of love. This is despite the vaccines being derived from aborted fetal cell lines. Now, Pope Leo is also a vocal critic of President Trump and J.D. Vance, particularly on immigration. This February, the new Pope reposted an article by NCR Online titled, J.D. Vance is wrong. Jesus doesn't ask us to rank our loves for others. And this article criticizes J.D. Vance for correctly arguing that we owe more immediate responsibility to our own family members and country than to things overseas, things that are removed from our lives. This idea is very ancient in Christian theology. And so it's pretty concerning that the new Pope seems to be at odds with the Acts of the Apostles, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, ironically, on the issue of subsidiarity. The Pope also retweeted an X post accusing Trump of, quote, racism and nativism, and he reposted a message from Cardinal Cupich, I mentioned it before, very bad guy from Chicago, saying, quote, there is nothing remotely Christian, American, or morally defensible about a policy that takes children away from their parents and warehouses them in cages. That is being carried out in our name, and the shame is on us all. Perpetuating this children in cages, Trump is evil narrative. You guys get the point. I do, however, want you to take a listen on the issue of immigration to this clip of Pope Leo addressing this question in a little more of a nuanced way than his retweets would suggest. Take a listen.
Both the first reading and the gospel make very clear a message which Pope Francis has been hammering home time and again since his very first trip as Pope, when he went to this little community, an island in southern Italy, the town of Lampedusa, where all these immigrants continue to come. It's a huge problem, and it's a problem worldwide, not only in this country. There's got to be a way both to solve the problem, but also to treat people with respect. Every one of us, whether we were born in the United States of America or on the North Pole, we all are given that gift of being created, the image and likeness of God. And the day we forget that.
So mass immigration is a problem, he says. He says it needs to be addressed, but it needs to be addressed humanely. I can get behind that. I have no problem with what he's saying. So that quote from him is much more nuanced, something that I can get behind, as opposed to some of these retweets, which were much more inflammatory and I think lacked a lot of the nuance that we saw in that clip. Other things that I should mention, in 2020, Pope Leo shared a message from Bishop Michael Olson saying, "I join my voice in prayers to those of my brother bishops that we might work hard to end racism in our hearts and in society. May God give comfort to the family of #George Floyd in this time of anguish." And then he himself posted, quote, "We need to hear more from leaders in the church to reject racism and seek justice." So Pope Leo assumed George Floyd, who died with a fatal level of fentanyl in his system, was somehow killed by a racist cop. He perpetuated the smear campaign against Derek Chauvin. And this, of course, resulted in the burning of American cities and actually many American churches, including Catholic churches, in 2020. So concerning that he would perpetuate that narrative seemingly without any evidence otherwise. The Pope also reposted Democrat Senator Chris Murphy's pro-gun control tweet, which stated, "To my colleagues, meaning Republicans, your cowardice to act cannot be whitewashed by thoughts and prayers. None of this ends unless you do something to stop it." Seems like he's anti-Second Amendment, pro-gun control. And then we have climate change. Pope Leo reposted an article regarding concerns that the U.S. won't meet carbon emission goals thanks to President Trump. That all sounds pretty bad. And a lot of you are probably rightfully concerned, but I want to offer a perspective, especially for some of you non-Catholics in the chat. It's really important to understand that the Pope is first and foremost a spiritual leader, not a political leader. He occupies the chair of St. Peter, a position guided by the Holy Spirit since its establishment by Jesus Christ himself. Catholics understand that the Pope's role is profound and rooted in divine authority. You can't scrutinize in the same way that you would a congressional candidate. And something else I think people are confused on here is this idea that the Pope is infallible, that whatever he says goes, that it's all true. The Pope rarely speaks from ex cathedra, meaning an infallible teaching. If Pope Leo just says something, that doesn't mean it is true, that it is church teaching. Ex cathedra has been invoked twice in the last 1,000 years. So most of the Pope's statements moving forward will be pastoral guidance, not biting declarations of faith that we all need to freak out about. The Pope is important, but the church militant and her teachings persist continually. We've had a lot of really bad popes in the past. The Pope is not going to take down Christ's church. It won't. This is what I think a lot of people are missing about the new Pope. If he says bad things like Pope Francis does, that there's a continuity here, that the church has survived a lot worse. Something else I want to quickly mention is that the previous Pope Leo XIII, actually prophesied the rise of American Catholicism, which is very interesting. In an 1895 encyclical, Pope Leo XIII reflected on the Catholic Church's deep historical connection to America, beginning with Columbus's voyages, which he described as seeking, quote, "to open a pathway for the Christian faith into new lands and new seas." And he likened Columbus's ships to Noah's Ark, bringing both the foundations of mighty states and the Catholic faith to the new world. And he highlighted that the American church's hierarchy was established at the same time as the founding of the Republic, suggesting that this timing reflects some design of divine providence. Pope Leo XIII even pointed to the friendship between George Washington and America's first Catholic bishop as a symbol of unity between the United States and the Catholic Church. And now we have, over a century later, a new Pope Leo who, frankly, in the most epic way, has fulfilled what the previous Pope Leo believed would happen. And today, Catholic conversions are on the rise, especially among traditional Catholic communities. This is very encouraging. And so I suppose that all this is to say, God works in mysterious ways. Let's wait and see who this Pope is going to become, what kind of church leader he will be. We don't have a clear idea yet. There are a lot of nuances. There are a lot of contradictions. We're going to find out. But I think for now, praying that he is guided by the Holy Spirit really matters. Even if you're a non-Catholic, please send him your prayers. All right. I'm going to quickly turn to a sponsor before I bring in a guest, a special guest that we have to break down this new papal election. But first, let's talk about Patriot Mobile. Together, we fought for the same thing, faith, freedom, and the country we love. One of the biggest supporters over the years is Patriot Mobile. If you're part of the Bongino Army, you should be on Patriot Mobile. Our candidate may have won, but this is no time to rest. We must keep supporting companies that share our values and stand for what we believe in. Switch to Patriot Mobile with confidence, knowing you'll get outstanding nationwide coverage because they operate on all 3 major networks. You can even have 2 numbers on 2 different networks on a single smartphone. Not only do you have the Silverloch guarantee, you'll get the Patriot Mobile coverage guarantee. Every dollar you spend supports a company that believes in our First and Second Amendment rights, the sanctity of life, our veterans and first responders. Switching is easy. It only takes minutes from wherever you are. Keep your phone, keep your number, or upgrade. They're 100% US-based team will take great care of you. Go to patriotmobile.com/Evita or call 972-PATRIOT. Go to get a free month of service on sign up with code Evita. That's EVITA. patriotmobile.com/Evita or call 972-PATRIOT. All right, Michael, do we have Chris Bedford here? 1 second. Oh, that's Guy. Guy's walking in right now. They usually do that. Do we, Michael, do we or not? We do? Okay. So I'm going to bring in a guest here, and just so you guys know who he is, this is Christopher Bedford. He and I worked together at The Federalist when I was just an intern, but he is the senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent for Blaze Media. Chris also currently serves as the vice chairman of the Young Americas for Freedom, and he is on the boards of the Daily Caller Foundation, the National Journalism Center, the American Principles Project, and he is a Claremont Lincoln Fellow and a Madison Fellow. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here. I'm trying to center my image here.
No worries. You look
cameras.
good.
It looks like I'm a little bit off.
And half of our viewers are on audio anyway, so it's no worries at all. The chat is going to be fine with it. We're just glad to have you here.
Lovely.
So I want to give the viewers some context here. So like I said, I was an intern at The Federalist while you were a senior editor. And a fun fact is that when I was trying to figure out how do I become a journalist, what is my voice like when I'm writing an op-ed, how do I write a headline, Emily Jasinski, who was in charge of the interns at that time, she was a cultural editor, said you should read lots of different op-eds and figure out whose voice do you want to emulate as you're trying to figure out kind of who you are as a journalist. And the person that I picked was you, Chris, because your writing is so incredible. You truly have a very powerful, matter-of-fact, but still inspiring voice in your writing. So you are truly an inspiration to me, and I'm really grateful to have you here.
No idea. That's extremely kind. It's been wonderful it was great to work with you those years. It was great to do that retreat. And it's been wonderful to see your incredible success and your growth in this podcast and in all of your endeavors. So it's fantastic to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Of
course. Well, so I want to get into this papal conclave. I gave everybody sort of a rundown, all the facts. Who is this guy? What has Pope Leo said that's really good? What has he said that's kind of concerning? But I want to first, right off the bat, get your reaction to this video of a TikToker suggesting that the conclave selected Pope Leo XIV on purpose to combat MAGA and President Trump. Let's play that video if you would, Michael.
Well, the Catholic Church threw a punch with Pope Leo. Let's be clear, selecting an American cardinal at this unique moment in United States history has to be construed as a direct rebuke of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Because in theory, there's never been a worse time to select an American leader for the Catholic Church, right? The church in America is falling apart. I am a church elder. I can see it myself. People are leaving the faith in droves, deconstructing what they used to believe because the church is unrecognizable. The values it professes and the things it actually does are two very dissonant things. Where's the church on immigration? Where's the church on social justice issues? Where's the church on literally anything, feeding starving children across the world? Church leaders in America have been silent in the age of Trump, but Pope Leo XIV has vocally called out Donald Trump and J.D. Vance for their treatment of immigrants and for other issues. And he ends up ascending to the papacy at a time where the American church is falling apart. I think it's a fascinating move by a church that recognizes that the world needs true biblical values, not empty American nationalism.
Chris, your thoughts?
That was incredible. I can't believe it's too early for that much stupid. It's shocking. So, I mean, I don't know how old he is, and I don't know where he grew up, but I grew up in Massachusetts in the 80s and the 90s in Boston, and a place that was once a vibrant Catholic community that was so packed with Catholics. That one generation before, there was the French Catholic school, there was the Irish Catholic school, there was the Italian Catholic school. That's how many Catholic schools they needed in order to keep what was going on in Massachusetts. And I lived through the abuse crisis, and a friend of our family who laid down on the train tracks one day and just stopped returning phone calls. And I saw the parish closures, and the parish that I grew up in still exists, but it's been merged with three other parishes because there's not enough money. And you have to call ahead in order to schedule confession, which is a sacrament. And when I did that last, I was there for 4 days and no one ever called me back in order to actually accept confession. The priests were stretched so thin. So I know what it is like to see a crisis in the church and to see people turn away and fall away. And that is not what's happening right now. It's truly amazing the moment that we are in the church. You wonder, when I was years ago, I would wonder, are we too far advanced? Have we gotten too obsessed with TikTok videos and Instagram to really be able to experience an awakening in this country? And what would a modern awakening look like now that so much of Protestantism seems to have run its course? Would there such a thing as a Catholic awakening? I know we've seen them across the world for sure, but never once in the United States. And we're living through it right now. And it's not because of the new Pope. It's because of the priests who have come in over the years. When I was a kid, being a Catholic priest was an immediate promotion in society. You were trusted. You could drop your kids off with the priest. It was an elevation in your community to someone of importance and someone of trust. That is no longer true, thanks to Satan and the sins of too many members of the clergy and cardinal law who covered it up. It's no longer true. Catholic priests, people cast suspicion on them, and they worry about them. Oh, is he another diddler? Is he someone else like that? Can I trust this person? Why did they become a priest? It seems strange in the secular world. And because of that evil, the only people who have joined the Catholic Church who are willing to be priests, they're not trying to hide their sins or their degeneracy. They're not looking for a ladder up in society. It's not a position to political power. Yes. It's because they want to serve God. They're prepared for war. They're prepared for battle. So when he says that he's losing the church and the church is in crisis, I actually believe it. But that's probably because I don't know him. And maybe I'm wrong from what I gathered from that TikTok video. But he's probably because the church that he recognizes, the church that finds it significantly easier to explain charity than it does transubstantiation, the church that is very comfortable running soup kitchens, but whose faithful don't even know that they're in the presence of the body of Christ. That's the church he's talking about, the boomer church, the church of the 70s and the 80s that produced this. Then he's right. It's going away. It is falling away. And the Catholic churches I go to all throughout Northern Virginia, but also when I'm traveling for work, in bad neighborhoods of Detroit, in Manchester, New Hampshire, in the central parts of the United States, are packed.
Yes.
And young people are kneeling, and young people are reverent, and young people are drawn to it. And I mean, I was getting text messages yesterday from friends who said, I might come back. This new Pope is drawing me back to church. I think I'll start going on Sundays again. Oh, it's great. I think you should go no matter who the Pope is, but that's wonderful. And the amount, I mean, I was with last night, two people who I was godfather to, who were adults who converted to the faith. It's vibrant. It's growing. And the bishops, I would actually say it's through no fault of the bishops that the church is growing. It's because of the laity and the priests. As Despite being the world's last absolute monarchy, the Catholic Church is surprisingly democratic and kind of always has been. And the driving force is of the people.
Well, I think you're right that there is a fervor, a spirituality that's much more deeper and real among young Catholics. There is something growing. You're right, the reward system has completely shifted. If you're going to be a priest, people kind of look at you funny instead of it being a noble calling like it was in the past. You're not really moving up. It's a true sacrifice. That change in the incentives has created a new generation of very devout young priests, but also there's a generation of very young, devout lay people who are responding to the despair of modernity, which is so bad that the only place we can go is the complete opposite direction. I want to get your thoughts on this new pope and how he contrasts with the more traditional elements of the young Catholic Church. Pope Leo has promoted McElroy in his role of selecting bishops under Pope Francis. And McElroy obviously has connections to the infamous Cardinal McElroy and the sexual abuse scandal. There was also note that Pope Leo shut down churches during COVID, and he had confession by phone, and he banned taking communion on the tongue. He said you have to do it on the hands. These to me signal perhaps he is of an older generation that is not very traditional. What do you think we can expect from him? Do you think the persecution of traditional Catholics, especially when it comes to the Latin Mass, is going to continue with Pope Leo?
Will be. Watching it yesterday, I would have thought that this would be it's a great moment of celebration. It's also a moment of quiet prayer. Mm-hmm. And it's a moment where we have to take a step back and recognize our duty as Catholics, as Christians, to pray for the Pope and pray for the Church and understand that God sends us what we need. And the Holy Spirit operates through the College of Cardinals and through the Catholic Church. And that despite thousands of years of our efforts, literally since the gospel, we have not been able to destroy Christ's church on earth. We just can't wreck it. It's not ours to break, and we're not allowed to. There are glimmers of light for adherence to the Latin Mass. The new pope came out in traditional clerical vestments, which his predecessor did not, for his first homily. And his predecessor, I think, was probably the first in hundreds of years to not do so. The Pope Leo is an actual devotee, I've heard, to the Latin Mass, was a lone priest in giving it in his diocese in the 80s and 90s before it was a thing, really, before John Paul II had really helped invigorate it and bring it back a little bit. Pope Benedict had doubled down on that. He was reportedly seen as recently as 3 years ago giving a private Catholic Mass in a chapel in Rome. Those are all good signs.
Yeah.
There are, of course, a lot of worry. There's a lot of worrying signs. It does draw me back to early Pope Francis when we were sitting there and looking and trying to divine, and everyone was looking for good signs. They're all good signs. It's fine. God bless them. But everyone was trying to just say, wow, I hope that this guy is secretly a traditionalist. And of course, he was not.
No.
I'm still hopeful for Pope Leo. The reality is you don't become a cardinal by bucking the system. You don't become Pope Francis was Pope for over a decade. You don't become a cardinal and in line for the Pope and brought into the Curia unless you are a company man. That's what separates cardinals from priests so dramatically. It's why you have to obey. You have to serve the Pope. You have to speak on behalf of the Church in one. So it's sometimes difficult to divine what exactly the private and personal feelings and devotions inside the soul of a pontiff is based on their service as a bishop of the Pope under those ideas and that thinking. However, the COVID stuff is deeply troubling. Well, I think one of the greatest disappointments of my lifetime literally including the abuse crisis, was the way that our bishops, who are princes of the church, princes on earth, acted subservient to our politicians during COVID, and were afraid of crossing our congressmen and our governors. They are not subservient. The church is equal to these politicians, and they should have greeted these people as equals and taken a card out of uh, Cardinal book and openly, publicly flouted these rules and marched in the streets and brought the Eucharist out in the streets and said, "We will not stop Mass because you might get sick. We will not change our confessions because you might get sick." That's completely insane. And the priests here in Washington, on Capitol Hill and nearby, some of them were reported to the police for holding secret masses. The church around the corner from me that I attended at the time before I had to move from DC because of the spikes in crime and the dangers here, was they just ring the bells at random hours. And if you were lucky enough and close enough to hear the bells, you knew that you could scurry in the back door because according to DC Fire Code, you have to leave a door unlocked. It's only right. And oh my gosh, we have some trespassers and let's hold Mass with all the lights off. It was a wild moment, but it also separated those people who were shepherds who were willing to go out and fight the wolves to save the sheep, and those who instead were more interested in serving power.
Yes, and it is deeply concerning that seemingly he capitulated. I don't know, he was in Peru at the time. I'm not sure if Pope Leo had the exact same restrictions, but I know that here in the United States, we had churches shuttered, but the weed dispensaries and even in some cases strip clubs open. So when you contrast the church closures with what was deemed essential, suddenly it becomes even more apparent that our leaders really abandoned the faithful during that time. And it's disappointing to see so many of them, including this new pope, seemingly abandoning the faithful when we needed strong leadership the most in the face of what was truly religious persecution. I want to talk to you a little bit, Chris, about the name Pope Leo. People have gathered a lot from it. Some have said, well, this means that he is a full-fledged SJW because of the name Pope Leo. Others have said, no way, he's so based, he's conservative, this is the greatest thing ever. Some background on Pope Leo XIII that I gathered a little bit. He did care a lot about social justice. He was, in a very Christian way though, he condemned Freemasonry, he condemned Americanism and capitalist exploitation of labor. He made Thomism the official philosophy of the Catholic Church. What are your thoughts on the name Pope Leo? What are we supposed to make of it? I think a lot of non-Catholics will look at some of the things that Pope Leo XIII did and say, well, he was clearly a leftist. But I think there's maybe some more nuance there. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, Pope Leo XIII was not a leftist. Let me see if I can move the camera here. Have a poster of Pope Leo XIII in my office, surrounded by his curia. It's authentic. You might be shocked by this, but there's actually not a huge demand for reproductions of these pieces of work.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a relic of some sort. But the Pope Leo XIII, being understood as a social justice warrior, is the kind of thing that would be repeated by CNN reporters who read his Wikipedia page.
Okay,
and it's not at all in line with what he actually did. And, the reporters do this all the time. I mean, granted, I use Wikipedia sometimes, but you have to check the sources. It was amazing in Donald Trump's first term how many people were talking about the importance of NATO, for example, who I knew for a fact from personal conversations did not know what the acronym stood for a couple months before. And you see that in overdrive with reporting on the Catholic Church. It's as shameful as the ignorance of the average Catholic is on actual church matters, it is significantly worse in the media. Do you think that many members of CNN or the New York Times go to church on Sunday?
Yeah, no.
Maybe when they're visiting their family at home in New Jersey, but no, they don't. So Pope Leo XIII was a strident anti-communist. He saw communism as a global threat, an atheist, expansionist slave state that would take men's spirits and subvert them, destroy the individual, remove the crosses, dismantle the churches. He actually, you were talking about this a little bit in your opening. He had that terrible vision of St. Michael the Archangel casting demons down into hell. And when he came from that vision, he wrote the St. Michael the Archangel prayer, which is a beautiful prayer. and asked and commanded that it be said after Mass in every parish across the planet, which not enough do. But I'm very happy to be a member of a parish that does.
Yes.
He thought that the best way an important way to combat communism in an age of extreme exploitation of labor in Europe was and across the world, was to stress the inherent dignity of the individual, to stress the inherent dignity of the ensouled person and the worker, to draw it back, as Pope Pius later did, to Saint Joseph the worker, to push back against this communism and say no one cares more about the individual and the person than the Catholic Church, which is charged with stewarding the faithful and protecting them. That is the inventor of hospitals and orphanages and charity in a world that didn't really have that at all, and still largely doesn't outside of the Church and its efforts. He was anti-modernist. He was anti-communist, and he's not the originator of Catholic social justice. He's the originator of Catholic social teaching. Mm-hmm. He is the author of it, and the important ways that our faith interacts with the world in the way that stands outside of modernity. And also, yesterday was the feast of St. Michael the Archangel's appearance on top of what is now Emperor Constantine's tomb, was previously a fortress. When he took his sword out, and it was seen by hundreds and hundreds of people, and he wiped blood off of the sword and put it in his scabbard, and it was finished. And it followed the Pope's leading a mob to sack a pagan temple that was the center of Rome still, and I think it was the last pagan temple in Rome, or one of the last. It was the major one. And when that was done, St. Michael the Archangel appeared as a vision to say, this is satisfied, Rome is cleansed. So that probably also plays into this. I mean, of course, it's silly to read too much into our name, unless it was something like Pius XIII. But that is a very good and hopeful sign to the faithful. And regardless of where this Pope goes and what his attitude ends up being towards the Latin Mass, the St. Michael the Archangel prayer is an important thing to remember. And I'm glad that we're talking about Pope Leo XIII. And I'm glad that you just showed that video for those people who are watching and not listening, because Pope Leo XIII is the first Pope ever to be caught on camera. So if you want to see a Pope in motion, the oldest one that you can see is Pope Leo XIII.
It's so true. And I love the way that you broke that down, Chris, because there's such a misunderstanding of Catholic social teaching. It has truly been twisted and distorted in the modern world. I have so many TikToks that I've been saving of like the worst Pope takes ever. And there was an analysis of Pope Leo XIII, and it was so criminally bad. Like essentially Pope Leo XIII was like Obama in the 1800s. Like it was absolutely ridiculous. And so I'm not fearful of that name at all. In fact, I think it's actually very encouraging. I'm one of those people who sees Pope Leo the 14th, and I say, wow, that's actually a very interesting, good name. I think it's a good sign, not the fear-mongering or even the like gleeful, like just giddiness from the far left. There is some nuance here. The church teaching is much more deep and more beautiful than modern social justice teachings. So
or republicanism or Democrat Party politics.
Exactly.
You can't put American politics onto what the Catholic Church teaches. It might surprise the MAGA critics of this Pope that he is far to the right of the president, as was Pope Francis, on abortion, on gay marriage. They are in agreement on transgenderism, which he fought in Peru when they tried to put it into government education, said, no, this is an assault on God. And it's no surprise that the Catholic Church, especially a bishop who served in Peru, is to the left of Donald Trump on immigration. That is just, it's this. They don't know what they speak of when they criticize for these reasons.
Well, and I think some of his, we talked about this in the intro to the show, but some of his retweets, Pope Leo's retweets, are a little bit they're a little bit inflammatory when it comes to immigration, kind of accusing Trump of nativism and racism. But if you hear him actually speak about immigration, he says mass immigration is a problem that needs to be addressed, but we have to do it in a humane way. Well, that's just church teaching. Like, I'm sorry, if you don't like that, then that's just what the church believes in the dignity of all people. So to me, his actual words are much more meaningful than sort of some bad retweets that he's posted. I want to get to your take on the Fatima children, Chris, for the viewers, so you guys understand what I'm talking about. In 1917, the Virgin Mary appeared to 3 shepherd children, Lucia, Jacinta, Francisco, in Fatima, Portugal. And during these apparitions, Mary revealed 3 secrets. The first was a vision of hell. The second predicted the end of World War I, the rise of communism, World War II, a call for the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. And the third secret, kept confidential until 2000, I guess described a symbolic vision of the persecution of Christians and an attack on a bishop dressed in white, which the church interpreted as relating to the suffering of the church and the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. A lot of people think that the church is hiding the final secret. My question to you, Chris, could the final secret finally be revealed? Do you think that they are hiding it from us? And if so, will we ever get the truth?
We will get the truth. We'll find it all will be revealed. We know the end of the book. There's no institution that can hide what is eventually coming. I find it difficult to I would never put myself in the seat to be able to interpret prophecy. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be difficult to have lived through Fatima and heard that prophecy and see the sun dance in the sky, and to see the rise of Adolf Hitler and Christ on the cross replaced with crucifixes in Bavaria, the home of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, and to see the expansion of global communism in that atheist slave state that took over half of Europe, and not see prophecies of the end times. This is just as true as it would be nearly impossible to have heard what John preached about and John wrote about the end times, and to see the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and not say, well, this is it. Mm-hmm. The reality is we just don't know. And I assume all will be revealed. All will come home, and we will figure this out bit by bit. The Christians are not done with persecution, which honestly, sure, it's kind of a good thing. It's a really good thing. As painful as it is. And in America, I talk about Christian persecution as like, oh, we lost our job. Oh, the company we invented was taken from us. And these are awful things. But there's huge parts of the world where you're slaughtered on Easter Sunday in church.
Yes.
Where your daughters are taken and sold into sexual slavery by Muslim pirates. Where no one is coming to help you, except for God. Where priests are regularly assassinated. We are the most persecuted faith in the entire planet, or not, which is completely ignored by American politicians, I think, to it's a great tragedy that that's the case, and ignored by global politicians in general. We're massively persecuted, and it's in that persecution that we find God completely. I mean, only a single one of the apostles escaped violent death for their religion. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Christ did not escape violent death until he defeated it. That is what sharpens faith. Being a Christian, just like being a priest in America and in the West, is no longer a necessity. It is not a requirement to be involved in political life or a requirement to be involved in business life. The pews may have been stacked in 1950s United States, but the hearts were empty. And that is no longer the case. You see people in mass on a Sunday in ordinary time, and you know that they're there for a reason, that they got up when their friends invited them to brunch, or their kids had a poop explosion, as seems to happen to me right before mass every single Sunday. Not to me, to my daughter. And when they know that they battle through that they maybe had one night off the entire week where they weren't completely slammed. It was Saturday night, and they threw back a couple martinis with their spouse. And so Sunday morning wasn't always the easiest. But they got there. And it wasn't because they needed to be seen there. It's because they truly and deeply believe. And that's the way that persecution and the lack of that promotional kind of society reflects on the person. And I pray that this continues, that the awakening that we're seeing in Washington and the Northeast and all over, I think all over the country really, is here to last, and that these souls who are brought back truly believe and give themselves and devote their life. Because I got news to you, church is better than therapy. I mean, the average person who goes to church on Sunday with their family and prays every night doesn't. They are so much more mentally sound and so much happier and so much more fulfilled, even in tragedy and even in sadness. I strongly recommend it to my friends who are going through hard times, and I think it truly does work.
I think so too, and there's so much to be optimistic about with the church, and there was so much joy yesterday as I was just observing. First of all, what was happening live in Vatican City, but then if you saw all the videos of reactions afterward, and I saw all these negative posts from people who I really love and respect on X, many of them non-Catholic, some of them Catholic, blackpilling on this Pope already. They're sharing his tweets, they're saying, this guy, he sucks, and I covered it. I mean, we talked about it today. We addressed some of the concerns. At the same time, I think, can we just enjoy this moment? Like, can we just enjoy this momentous time in church history? We have a new pope. This is like 2,000 years of church history continuing today. It's beautiful. It's historic. And I want to get your reaction, Chris, to these young Catholic school children learning that the Pope is American, on this note of just enjoying this moment of taking it all in despite all of the black pillars. Let's play that video if we could, Michael.
Leo XIV, it's Cardinal Primus, he's American.
Chris, your reaction?
That's amazing. And I rarely do this, but I had a work dinner last night and a work event in DC, so I didn't get home until after my son was asleep. And I just made me, and I left before he woke up. Just made me realize I can't wait to talk to him. He's a Catholic school kid, to talk to him about this new Pope. And all the excitement. I guess I was too self-focused. And see the black pillars online. It's just shut up. I mean, the faithful there who were gathered in St. Peter's Square, which must have been amazing to hear every one of the bells in Vatican City going off, are standing underneath an obelisk that stood on the Sinai Peninsula, an Egyptian obelisk that Moses passed by when he was leading the Jews with no home on earth through the desert for 40 years to escape Egyptian slavery. That obelisk was on the trail. It would have been seen by St. Joseph and Mary and infant Christ as they fled King Herod. The black pillars don't know anything about blackpilling. They don't know anything about suffering. They don't know anything about persecution. They're completely and totally full of it. And the ancientness of the church, and just that looking at that obelisk at the center of St. Peter's Square is like such a great reminder to humble ourselves a little bit and to pull back and say, wow, we actually know nothing. We really know nothing. It's an exciting moment that we have an American Pope. I do think that there's probably one truthful aspect of that TikTok you played earlier, that we probably would have had to wait a couple decades for an American pontiff if he wasn't. It wasn't an expectation among some in the church that he was there to rebuke the United States.
Okay, all right.
But the Holy Spirit moves in mysterious ways. There's so much, as we discussed today, there's so much that remains to be seen. There's so much mystery. We don't know what kind of reign Pope Leo XIV is going to have, but we do know that it is Catholic. And if you ever start to despair, and you ever start to worry, as I know that some people did, even people who I regard as generally as faithful Catholics under Pope Francis, It helps to read Saint Padre Pio's writings and stories on this. Saint Padre Pio was banned from giving public masses by church hierarchy.
Yes.
He was not allowed. He was kept under guard. He was not allowed to leave and to talk to the people anymore. And when a young priest spoke ill of the Vatican and said, "How dare they?" he viciously rebuked him and told him that his duty as a Catholic was obedience. And if that is his cross to bear, then it is his cross to bear. And when you do risk blackpilling, or you're sad that your incredible and packed liturgy filled with young families that wants to practice the ancient Latin Mass has been shut down, think of Padre Pio stuck at home and unable to perform the Mass in public, and remember his teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the church will certainly survive a bad pope. We've survived many bad popes in the past. I mean, this is the militants going to continue. Dudes. Yes, there's some really bad ones. You do your church history research. If you didn't like Pope Francis, it gets a lot worse. So you can go back there. I mean, these are men that are supposed to be guided by the Holy Spirit, but they're also men. The Catholic Church doesn't believe that these are mini gods on earth who don't make mistakes. They obviously do. We talked and before you came on, Chris, that the church, the Pope very infrequently speaks with infallibility. It's happened like twice in the last 1,000 years. So anything that he says doesn't mean it's church teaching or it's set in stone. This is, obviously, he can make mistakes. Usually it's just guidance. It doesn't mean that it's official church teaching. I think a lot of people have to keep that in mind. And I would like everybody, Catholic, non-Catholic, pray for this Pope and also soak in this moment because it's just so beautiful. And Chris, I really appreciate you joining the show, giving me your insights, especially on Pope Leo XIII. Some of those things you said, I didn't even know about. I need to do more research. He sounds like such an amazing former Pope. I want to be respectful of your time, Chris, so where can people go to follow you?